And thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. My guest this hour is the former Secretary of State, former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. You might have heard she has a new book out. It's called simply What Happened. Secretary Clinton, I usually start with a gigantic 17-minute monologue, but tonight we're just going right into this. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Rachel.
Let me start with something that just happened tonight. North Korea tonight just shot another missile over Japan. They've done this twice in 2.5 weeks now. You have said, since you've been talking about your book and since people have had the chance to talk to you about current affairs, you've said that President Trump is being played by Kim Jong-un, that Trump is somehow playing right into his hand. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean a couple things. One, we know we can't get anything done in this very threatening situation if we don't work with our allies, South Korea and Japan, and also bring China in. The president has basically insulted and attacked South Korea. South Korea is literally, within miles of the border with North Korea. They would be so at risk if something were done by Kim Jong-un. Japan, which now has, as you said, 2 missiles flying over it, is going to have to be coaxed into a very intensive diplomatic effort, because the alternative for Japan is to say, we're going to defend ourselves. We're not going to sit by and let this happen. So what I've been advocating, which, it's not revolutionary, but it's what we need, is intensive diplomacy and upping our missile defense systems, both in South Korea and in Japan. Now, that won't make China happy. They don't want us to put our THAAD system or other advanced missile defense into these 2 countries, but that should bring them to the table so that they are part of making it clear to Kim Jong-un that there are consequences. And the message has to be not hysterical, not delivered in a tweet, but very clear and convincing that if you attack our allies or you go after any territory, be it Guam or any part of the United States, we will have to retaliate, and we will do so with devastating consequences. We don't want to get there. That is not the preferred position. You don't start with that. You make it clear that's where, if he does offensive measures against us, we would end up. But here's my big concern. Diplomacy with North Korea is complicated. It requires people who know the language, the customs, the history. We have decimated our State Department. Foreign service officers with decades of experience have either been ignored or in some cases pushed so hard that they have resigned. Right now, we need the best people we can possibly muster to have a full court press on diplomacy, and then we can see realistically where we are. But this missile test, and it's not clear yet from the early reports whether it's an intermediate range or an intercontinental ballistic missile, is sending a message from Kim Jong-un that he is not deterred. And that's what I mean about all the tough talk that we hear from our president, really actually playing right into Kim Jong-un's hands. And that's what I mean when I say he's been played. And this is a clear and present danger. And if it's allowed to go forward, we will face even worse choices. That's why right now we need smart diplomatic intervention. If we don't have it in the government, then bring in some people from the outside with experience. We have experienced diplomats who have dealt with North Korea, but this needs to be happening right now. And get over the Twitter stuff and get on to the diplomatic negotiations.
You have described this week, you've said that it seems to you that Defense Secretary Jim Mattis may be effectively operating as both Defense Secretary and Secretary of State. You, of course, are one of the highest profile Secretaries of State we've ever had. Rex Tillerson is among the lowest, certainly the lowest in modern times. He has advocated a 30% cut to his own agency. He's left dozens of senior jobs unfilled, as you said today. He told State Department staff that his biggest goal for the State Department is efficiency, and that's why he wants to shrink the State Department so much. They've even stopped doing daily press briefings. Given the risk of nuclear war with North Korea, given the sorts of diplomatic challenges that we've got around the country and around the world, why do you think they are hollowing out the State Department?
Well, I think they came in with pre-existing conceptions about the State Department and about diplomacy that were not particularly well-founded. It's not that you don't want to be more efficient. I actually had a process to try to make sure we became more efficient. But they came in with a bias against diplomats and diplomacy. Now, the good news, Rachel, is that the budget that Tillerson's been promoting has been rejected in the Senate Appropriations Committee on a bipartisan basis. The members of the Senate have said, look, we've traveled the world. We know what our diplomats do on the front lines, and we are not going to give you a 30% cut. And they basically came up with about the same amount of money. So the Congress is even recognizing that there is no strategy. There's no real plan. What I hear from inside the department, because I still have a lot of communication coming to me, is that there's a very small group of people around Tillerson, none of them experienced diplomats that he has brought in to be his palace guard, so to speak. They don't even reach out into the State Department to talk to the people who have studied North Korea for years. So they're not getting the expertise and experience that is still at the State Department.
Because
and I
think they're disdainful of that expertise?
I think they're disdainful. I think they don't know what they don't know, to be honest. I think that they had views that were superficial, and I think the perspective of Secretary Tillerson was as a chief executive officer, where you tell people what to do, you tell Kim Jong-un what to do, you tell people that, you have a different plan. That the world is a really complex place, and it's about a lot of things that people in the State Department have had experience with and at least should be brought to the table and listened to, which I don't think is happening.
Do you think that it was inherently a bad idea to take somebody who had been a lifer at Exxon, somebody who had only in his adult life ever worked at Exxon, the immediate past CEO of Exxon, to put him immediately in charge of diplomacy and the State Department? I mean, when you were Secretary of State in 2011, Rex Tillerson went to Vladimir Putin's house on the Black Sea to celebrate Exxon and Russia signing a $500 billion oil deal that was probably the biggest oil deal in the history of oil.
Right.
Putin later awarded him the Russian Order of Friendship when another part of that deal closed. I mean, was he a strange choice for the job? Is being the CEO of Exxon inappropriate experience to bring to the job that he's trying to do now?
I think it's very limited experience. I think there have been in our past people with extensive business experience, CEO positions, other kinds of private sector work that I believe could have gotten into this position and had a better understanding of what's required in the 21st century. I don't know that he was a particularly bad choice from the very beginning. I mean, I didn't know anything about him other than what you've just said, basically. But he's never reached out to anybody. He's never asked people. There used to be a tradition. Republican, Democratic administrations, you would come in and the prior secretaries of state would all get together and have a dinner and talk. And oftentimes you would be on the other end of a phone call, say, what did you deal with on this? Or can you tell me some more about that? I've talked to a few of the other secretaries of state that are still around, and nobody's heard anything, whether they were Republican or Democrat.
And you haven't had any communication with them?
No, none. I met him at the inauguration lunch, and that was it. And then you've got somebody like Steve Bannon, who clearly is wielding influence from the outside, who, recently just spewed contempt about some excellent American public servants, including 2 prior Republican secretaries of state and 1 prior Republican national security advisor. So the attitude was so negative. And, why take a job that you're not willing to really dive into and learn about? And you come in with preconceptions, and you have a model that you're trying to put on top of an institution that has so much inherent strength, even though, does it have problems? Everything in government does. That's not a big surprise. but then not to want to learn. I kept waiting for the aha moment where you'd hear, the secretary actually called in people and said, hey, tell me what I don't know. Tell me what I need to know. Let's listen. But from what I hear, that doesn't happen. And in fact, there's a concerted effort to prevent that from happening.